So welcome to the fourth policy webinar. Today we have invited two speakers. Our first speaker is Michael Ploder, who is the head of the research group for technology, innovation and policy consulting at Joanneum Research in Graz, Austria. And our second speaker is his colleague Christian Hartmann, who's a senior policy researcher also at Joanneum Research in Graz. And my name is Janine Halder, and I'm working at the Austrian Research Promotion Agency in Vienna, Austria. And yeah, I will lead us today through the agenda. So yeah, we have now the welcoming, and we hear then the presentation, which is entitled Mission Opportunities for the Western Balkans, where we will learn about what are the EU missions, how they're implemented, how far the Western Balkan countries already involved. And we're summarizing then up the official part of the webinar. But we would like really that you stay for a common dialogue where we would like to exchange about, what is your knowledge about the missions, your ideas, are you already involved, or if you're having questions. And we will record this webinar. We will publish only the part of the presentation, not the discussion parts. They will be uploaded to YouTube. You will also be able to get the slides, so there's no rush of taking notes. You can really focus on the webinar. We will upload them to our platform, where you find also the videos and presentations from the past 3 webinars. And you can also register already for the 5th webinar, which will be 27th of June. And I will copy the link to as well, where you can go to the videos and presentation as well as the registration in the chat. So I would now already pass the floor to Michael Ploder, who will share his screen. And
thank you. You should see my screen now if everything works. Is this correct?
yes,
Good.
We hear you and we see your screen perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. I have been already introduced, so I immediately start with a short presentation, which will be held by Christian and me in something like a double conference. It's about EU missions and the opportunities for the Western Balkans. First, a very quick introduction of our institution. So we are from Joanneum Research, which is a non-university research company, an RTO, headquartered in Graz, which is in the south of Austria. Our owners are the federal provinces of Styria, Carinthia, and Burgenland. Has 9 provinces, as you might know. We have about 500 employees, which are from more than 25 countries. So we became quite international in the last few years. And yeah, we have 6 locations, and we are basically developing technical solutions, but also solutions for the society and industry in Austria, but also internationally. And our institute is one of the institutes with a background in social and economic sciences. It creates basics and orientation for evidence-based policy decisions. And you will see on the next slide a couple of projects where we have been linked to the idea and or the creation of the idea of missions, and also some ongoing projects we are involved in. So everything started, in fact, with 2 studies commissioned by the DG Research in preparation of the current framework program Horizon Europe, where we basically help the Commission to formulate the idea what is a mission and which types of missions are existing and how far this might be interesting and useful for further development of the framework program. In parallel, or as a follow-up, we worked on a study of the OECD, the Austrian contribution for that study, discussing the design and implementation of mission-oriented policies in order to address societal challenges. And then at the end of 2021, the whole process started together with the framework program Horizon Europe in Austria. And we have been commissioned together with AIT, which is also an RTO in Austria, with an ex-ante baseline study preparing the Austrian uptake of the EU mission. This was very important, and I will show you a little bit later something about the creation of the governance in Austria, so we'll come back to that study. And at the same time, we already prepared our application together with many other colleagues from several countries in Europe for the TRAMI project, which was a coordinated support action, which should support the implementation, at least for the starting phase, the implementation of EU missions in European countries. So TRAMI is standing for Transnational Cooperation on the Mission Approach. And now currently I'm working on several projects focusing on the mission. So the mission facility for policy learning, foresight, monitoring, evaluation commissioned by the Austrian government. One of our partners, by the way, is also ZSI. So also in the call now. And another project at the national level is Into Mission. It's about informational infrastructures. We do it together with colleagues in Finland. We currently working on an analysis of challenges in the implementation of EU missions between the SDI and sectoral resorts. That's a very important issue. We'll come back to that again in our discussion. We're working on another cross-cutting project for the Mission Oceans, where we seek for synergies of various instruments in order to implement the ocean mission. So for instance, not just the EU framework program for research and innovation, but also ERDF and other instruments which are available. Then we are building the implementation or support the implementation of the implementation platform MIP for ADAPT for the climate adapt mission together with Ricardo and many other partners. And we are also just finished a study for the German government, by the way, also together with ZSI, preparing the German position concerning EU FP10. And as you might have expected, this is also link to the idea of EU missions. So we want to learn more how the missions could be developed in the next framework program. And now, if I'm able to switch the slide, I would hand over to Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we have now heard so much about projects related to missions. So I think it's now the right point of time to go a bit into definitions. So what are missions when it comes to research and innovation policy? This slide here just presents kind of a stylized history of missions. And as you can see here in the left-hand corner, missions are quite old concept. The first very big mission was in fact a mission in defense research. It was the Manhattan Project in World War II that led to the development of the atomic bomb. But there are also more constructive things that build upon this approach then, like the Apollo mission, as you can see next to this mushroom cloud, but also, of course, when it comes to more complex things in terms of technology policy and interacting with industry. You see here the TGV, you can see Concorde, which was also in fact a mission, the hypersonic aeroplane to transport people, but also Airbus in a certain way. There are several branches that lead from the past to the present and also to the future. And as you can see here in the upper corner, this kind of new missions approach, which are, and I will come to this in a few seconds when we have the next slide, there are also kind of transformative missions, missions that are dealing with very complex systems that need to change, while several arenas of activity have to be dealt with at the same time, where citizens have to be engaged, where industry has to draw in. So these new missions, a typical example is, for example, is here the Energiewende, the change of energy supply in Germany. They abandoned already a decade ago nuclear power supply. And as you can see, there are also others. Then there are, of course, things like a prolongation of more classic approaches, like the Artemis program by NASA in the US, where they again want to go to the moon, but also things like the warp speed initiative in course of Corona, where in the US lots of resources were rallied to find a vaccine against COVID. So that's the initial picture, but now let us have a look on the types of missions we can talk about. And as you can see here, there are, broadly speaking, 4 types of missions when we talk about mission-oriented policy in a broader sense. The first category, that's science and breakthrough missions that really aim at scientific excellence, at something really new in science, like the BRAIN project, but also research on Ebola, for example, to find a vaccine here. They are always looking at scientific breakthroughs, really to have a new step, a new paradigm here, but not always on with an eye on potential applications. Then there's a next category, that's technology accelerator missions. You have, if you remember back the last slide, there already were some in place, like Apollo, now Artemis, the TGV, the first high-speed train in Europe, developed in France, but also Concorde. But of course, also new initiatives like the battery research. There's an existing IPSI here in Europe. And those accelerator missions, they're really aiming at functioning complex solutions. And of course, here there's a need to concert massive applications of resources. So a rather complex thing. And this leads to the next interesting thing, and that's the most important one. So bear this in mind when we go on with our presentation until the end. That's transformative missions. Yeah, what are they about? They are about the change of existing large-scale socio-technical systems, like our transition out of fossil fuels into renewables, for example. And they involve social, technological, and organizational institutional innovations. Just think for 1 minute about e-mobility, how difficult this is to implement. Yeah, because there are so different strengths, attitudes by consumers, technologies, support infrastructure, all these kind of things have to be dealt with at the same time. So just a few examples here. Again, as I said, the energy change in Energiewende in Germany, but of course the EU missions within Horizon Europe. They are, and we will see this in a second, clearly transformative. Now let me just complete. There's a 4th kind of mission type one needs to mention here as well. That's umbrella missions. They are kind of like an umbrella with overarching goals to bring together several parts that might be missions in the proper sense, or even of different sorts, like the German high technology strategy, or the top sector strategy, a top sector approach in the Netherlands, or most prominently, of course, when we talk about European, across European activities, the European Green Deal. Next slide, please. So I hope you bear in mind that we talk mainly about transformative missions, and that's when we talk about EU missions within Horizon Europe, they are clearly transformative in character. So currently in the ongoing program, there are 5 missions, yeah, and all of them have a transformative perspective, but one has to say, they change a bit, of course, in terms of how this approach is being reached. Because if you look at the first mission, adaptation to climate change, which addresses one of the most pressing challenges that we are currently facing, growing average temperatures and all those implications that come with this. And here, the main aim is to support at least 150 European regions and communities to become climate resilient by 2030. A very ambitious goal if you think about this very warm spring that we had, the extreme weather events that come all the time. So that's the first. Cancer. Here it's more about really dealing with health issues. So it's beating cancer and improve the lives of more than 3 million people by 2030 by means of prevention, cure, and solution to live and long better. So this is more geared, of course, towards pure research, but of course it has also implications in these other domains that are characteristic for a transformative mission. Restore our oceans and waters. Here it's mainly about sort of making our oceans, but also our waters sort of on the continent clean and consumable again. And then, of course, the fourth one that's quite most prominent because it has also quite some activities like the Net Zero Cities initiative, 100 climate neutral and smart cities by 2030. And last but not least, a soil deal for Europe with 100 living labs and lighthouses to lead the transition towards healthy soils by 2030. There's also one thing, as you may guess, some of the 5 missions might have thematic overlaps or synergetic potentials. I will leave it here by this now and give back to Michael.
Yeah, as Christian already said, when talking about emissions, it's not just about SDI or research and innovation. It's especially taking up issues and challenges and finding solutions. So it's about innovation in a systemic sense. And another challenge in that case here is introducing new forms of governance. And there are various ideal types of new forms of governance which are quite interesting and relevant for the implementation of the mission approach. One of it is a state-centric form of governance inspired by Mazzucato and others, and you know quite well from that approach maybe when you think about the book The Entrepreneur's State. And one idea in a narrow sense is, of course, to support a mission like the moonshot. But there are also other forms of governance, like a bottom-up driven governance inspired by Schott and Steinmüller's contribution. It's more about open-ended wicked challenges which are discussed here with an unclear problem definition and solutions, and practical approach to governance inspired by McCloskey and Gardy. And both of them, all of them have a different focus. So the one is more the mission with clear goals and targets, where you have a comprehensive policy mix introduced, but more or less top-down in a directional way by the entrepreneurial state who plays a proactive role in an early high-risk phase, while the bottom-up governance approach is focusing on that open-ended wicked challenges where you need a more enabling role of the government and temporary protection maybe. That's what you also have in the case of societal challenges and wicked issues which are linked to that. And finally, the state skeptical approach is more focusing on stressing the key role of private entrepreneurs, and the government is more in a restricted role, enabling and regulating in the background, setting the framework. So all of these governance approaches are ideal types and ideal models, and they need to be taken up in a very pragmatic manner. At the end of the day, what we need for the transformative mission which have been described by Christian, we need more or less a mixture of these governance approaches. So we need to find suitable models, which of course depend on the types and characteristics of the mission first in question, but also on the area where these missions need to be implemented. So the political cultures, what we have there as the governance structures, is very important for a successful mission governance. Therefore, we expect for each mission and each country and each region a very specific translation of what is mission governance. And what are the challenges when I switch over, when thinking about governance in practice for the missions? So first of all, it's about policy coordinations. It's cross-cutting when you really start from the challenge and the problem. You need multi-level level coordination from the European to the local level, including the national and the regional as well. But you also need horizontal coordination within sector policies, but also between SDI and sector policies. And this is not usually reflected by a government at the national level, even not at the European level. This was the big challenge even for the European Commission. You know, the mission started from DG R&I at the beginning, and now it's really transported, it's transferred to other DGs as well, which are participating and very active now, but now in the implementation of missions, for instance, DG Climate and others. And there's also the challenge of coordination between ministries and implementing agencies. So another strand of challenges concerns the temporality of policy mixes over time. So missions and the implementation of missions needs to draw on existing structures, and partly, of course, you need to build new ones. So for instance, mission agencies. In Austria, I will show you in the next slides, mission in Austria, mission specific groups have been introduced. You will see them in the next slides, but you also need a definition of clear targets versus an open-endedness of wicked challenges. And finally, you also need a balance between bottom-up experimentation and learning versus top-down goal-oriented guidance and planning. And before I describe the next slide, I show it to you, how the mission governance in Austria has been created. It was not a process of 1 week, it was a process of about 3 years. So it started at the end of 2021, where a working group, EU missions, has been created, where the main stakeholders of the government, but also the knowledge creating institutions like universities have been included. In the background, there have been several institutional support entities which have been quite helpful there. The EU mission boards at the EU level, the EU mission groups, the strategic program committee of Horizon Europe. There was the Trummer project, of course, the error policy agenda, and there have been these exchanges with the OECD. And then the mission action groups, these mission agencies, have been introduced. For each mission one, so for the mission cancer, climate, cities, waters, and soil, and at the beginning, at the starting phase, it was just orientation, which was high on the agenda of these mission action groups. They needed to translate the idea of missions to the Austrian, to the regional needs and challenges. And then in 2023, a new act came in, so a mission management group has been introduced. This is a broader stakeholder forum where, for instance, the Industrial Association and other associations have been included into the discussion. And then at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, 2 additional players came in. In red, you see the mission management unit. And the mission management unit is like something like an office or a secretariat supporting all mission action group and the whole governance in communicating, exchanging, setting up processes which are relevant for the current state of the mission implementation. And there in yellow, you see the mission facility. I've just mentioned this mission facility beforehand, so we are part of it, which supports policy learning, foresight, monitoring, and evaluation. So one of the first tasks there is, for instance, the creation of impact pathways according to the mission action plans which are currently created in Austria by the mission action groups. So a complex system which is growing even now, and therefore when we talk about mission governance, we must learn that this is nothing you put on top within 1 week, but this is part of a transformation process by itself. And these are the most active players now, the mission action groups, the mission management unit, and the mission facility.
Yeah, my turn again. So let us turn back a bit to the EU missions, where we had now once a short excursus to the Austrian case study on mission governance. So as you may know, after 2 years' time of implementation in Horizon Europe, there is now a monitoring report on missions available by European Commission itself, with a few interesting messages. So the first message, and most important one, is so you can see it turns out that EU missions as a new approach are a significant trigger. On the one hand, to kick off mission-oriented policy discussions, and also developments across and different levels of the European Union. So that's the first key message. Michael, I think you need to push the button. Yeah, okay, thanks. So, of course, one has to see that in most countries it's at early stages. Yeah, but nevertheless, one has to say that all EU member countries, of course, with different degrees of progress, are preparing themselves to integrate missions in their own policies and policy initiatives. And they have been setting up already a variety of mechanisms to do so. Synergies, and just remember when I presented the slides with those 5 missions, so there might be synergies between the missions, but also within each mission. It's still too early to see synergies between public sector, community actions, private sectors, and also bringing in private initiatives. Next slide, please. Michael, could you take the next slide? Okay, thanks. Yeah. If you look beyond Horizon Europe and go down to national, regional, and local levels, one can say that most sectors are still in the process of sense-making, exploring. So as this is really a new thing, there's still a need to experiment with appropriate roles and logic models for the approach. And of course, one has to say in most of the regions and countries, those approaches are based on existing structures. Directionality, which is a key element of missions, well, it can be seen. So there are impacts going into the right directions of the mission's objectives. And well, one thing to mention here, as we had governance already on the plate a few slides ago, at EU level, horizontal governance mechanisms have been set up and are functioning and have been accepted. But there's one big but. Also DG Regio and other, our comment is here, other commissions like DG Agro or DG Grow need to be involved here as well. That I think that's a key important step for the future at EU level. At national level, one has to say some countries are developing national coordinated governance approaches, as we have seen in Austria. And I think there's a good road and also good practices available, especially for you as accession countries. So I think now, Michael, it's your turn again.
Yeah. So I have told you about the TRAMI project, and we had about 25 partners in the TRAMI project, and we collected experiences and also a notion how far the missions came so far, what are the challenges, etc. And on that basis, I show you a short assessment of the advancement of missions, which corresponds, of course, to the outcomes or the results of the evaluation conducted by Lester Reed and others. So first, and what was an important finding? The mission readiness is uneven in European countries and regions. So in some countries and regions, we have set up mission governance structures and programs already. In other countries are only about to start, and then we need to know that in some countries already these concrete measures in order to handle and deal with the societal challenges have been in charge and implemented partly in another way. So they have been quite quick to take up the mission approach now and transfer existing ideas, existing understanding in the framework and the approach of the mission-oriented innovation policy. There's no single best way, a model. That's what I already said. So the trajectories of the national political systems really matter. So the missions need to be embedded and aligned with the existing structures, institutions, initiatives, and include the pre-existing national missions as far as they have been there. They need to include the instruments which are there, for instance, funding, SDI, rural development, all structural change at the national level, at the regional level, and therefore, of course, the EU programs which are potentially linked to the missions are highly important as well. So there's a need for alignment, the need for the EU missions need to be aligned and synchronized with the pre-existing strategies and initiatives. And even the missions on the national and regional level need a synchronization. So among each other. For instance, I guess it was about 1 week ago, we had a large workshop where the missions and the mission action groups in Austria came together and discussed what are common strands of thinking, what might be synergies between the Austrian missions and their implementation. An important thing is, and that's important because it's about what's really new with the missions, the SDI and policy trap. So mission-oriented policy needs to go beyond SDI policy. We are talking about a new form of governance and a whole of government approach and beyond policy circles. Otherwise, we are in danger to get lost in an SDI trap. So when our researchers conduct research or apply for funding in the same manner they have done for ages, this will not change anything. Involvement of the private sectors and the citizens is a big challenge and highly important, but still to be strengthened in the individual missions. So this is a high on the agenda of mission implementation in all countries, also for instance in Austria. And then point 5, good and promising practices are currently emerging. So the willingness of advanced countries and regions to share their innovative and promising experiences meets the strong demand from other countries. So under that point, we could say it's all about you. I mean, now you as participant in the webinar, when we are talking about the EU missions, we see a high potential that various decision makers, agents in our countries and regions work together, learn from each other, transform the one or the other solution which has been created, for instance, for a region or a municipality in Portugal to a region or municipality in the West Balkans. Institutional capacity building, this is also very important. When we talk about transformation, this also means a new way of thinking, coordination, and setting the frame. So when policy actors, when civil servants want to be involved in mission implementation, after a short while, they will cross a fence of their usual responsibilities. So building institutional and managerial capacities for mission governance at the strategic and operational level, new forms of interaction is really important. Otherwise, the missions will not work, but otherwise we will not create new solutions and systemic transformation. And the missions still receive too limited attention and funding. So far, we think that the mission arrived and came in order to stay. We need to put more attention on a long term on missions currently. We know that in Europe, but also worldwide, the missions might be overshadowed to a certain degree by pressing concerns of poly crisis, for instance, the war in Ukraine, which also fosters other important ideas and moves like thinking about strategic autonomy throughout Europe. But the missions by themselves are important, and they need consistency and continuity in implementation. And we need, of course, to intervene in the existing frame and balances of bargaining and stakes of incumbent. So this is also something uncomfortable for the, I would say, whole ecosystem, also including those who are currently in the forefront, for instance, of research in a certain topic. So these are the main challenges of advancement of the mission currently. And for the next slides, we come now to the EU13 and potentials for the Western Balkans. Christian, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Can we try to finish within the next 5 minutes? So we have
I will be quite swift. So
Christian is catching up.
Yeah, just a few words on the uptake in the EU13 countries that might be also serve as a role model for the Western Balkans. In principle, one can say that they have met there with a positive response. So missions came to stay, but of course there are quite different sort of trajectories to be seen in those EU13 countries. Some countries are very active, like Poland, Slovakia, Romania, Hungary, Croatia. But the activities have so far been concentrated on a few individual players in sense of agencies or other players from the national innovation system. Some countries, and that's an interesting approach, will come up again when we look at Western Balkans, is missions have been linked to the three. You know, there's this approach of quintuple helix strategies within smart specialization issued by DG Regio. In connection here with health and cancer, which might be a very interesting thing, because we saw there are cancer projects all across Western Balkan countries when it comes to missions. And last but not least, individual countries are also discussing mission approaches outside the 5 EU missions, like Slovakia. So as you can see here, there's quite some activity. Now let us have a look on. We made a bit of very simple analysis. So it's not very deep digging, but just to give you a flavor of how Western Balkans stand when it comes to EU missions. We just query Chorus a bit to this to see this, and as you can see here, well, on the left hand, just to calibrate a bit the successful participation of the relevant countries, and also the normalization of the participation by 100,000 inhabitants. And on the right-hand side, you can see here participation in EU missions on the basis of successful application for grants in projects. As you can see here, there, especially in Serbia, there are already quite a few projects ongoing, 12 in total, but also Bosnia and Herzegovina and also Montenegro and North Macedonia, they have at least more than one project. In Albania, it's currently one project running, and they are getting across all those 5 missions. Only Kosovo is currently missing in that respect. Yeah, and I turn back to Michael with the conclusions. Michael, please.
Yeah, the potentials of the Western Balkans for participation in EU missions, they're called EU missions, but not because the EU owns the mission. The EU missions, the missions in the background, they are our common challenge, also in the Western Balkan countries. So you're facing basically the same issues and challenges we have here in Austria, or maybe even better, better comparable places and regions in Italy or in Spain, depending where you're sitting now. First of all, what are the challenges for us are obviously also the challenges for you in the Western Balkans. So different levels of readiness to participate in Horizon Europe across countries, different mission readiness levels, and also the need to develop capacities both on the research and the governance side. We need to transfer our government and government structures and the governance in all of our countries and regions. What are the potentials for Western Balkans especially? So putting missions in risk-free on the agenda might be a very helpful approach. So Christian already mentioned that. You also have the potential to participate in Horizon Europe program and projects in various ways. Just as one example, Horizon 4.1, widening participation and spreading excellence, but it also could be just coming into contact via, for instance, the MIP for ADAPT with a region which might have similar challenges, created a certain solution. The solution and the ideas are exchanged and transferred. There are, of course, the Interreg transnational programs, you know, many of them, Danube, Balkan, Mediterranean, Iranian, and also the Interreg IPA, and of course, non-research lines within EU missions were, for instance, within net zero cities, the individual responsible, the persons, the decision makers at the municipal or cities level have the opportunity to exchange. Same occurs, of course, among the charter signatories in climate adapt. Yeah, that's the most important thing we wanted to say. There are just some short conclusions, but I think we also, in order to keep the time, we could come back to these conclusions. Basically, it's really how we think that you could be and should be involved and come together with agents, actors, and yeah, territorial units in Europe. And I think what we should do now is, if this is already okay, for you to come up with 2 questions when we go to the discussion. We think this should be a lively discussion now on the basis of what we have just presented, and we would kindly ask you to start with a short, very quick introduction. So why you are here, and what's your perception of the mission or the idea of mission when thinking about your region and organization, and why you are interested in the mission approach. And we hope that already in our discussion, the one or the other common idea comes up, and the one or the other idea to collaborate within the EU missions. So many thanks for that. Thank you for your attention.